morning.
Morning. Now, I find that statement by the president to be disingenuous, frankly, because the ratio of tax to GDP is dependent on two figures. One is the tax revenue, and the other one is the GDP. It depends on how you measure both. In this country, the government has been very smart in using levies instead of taxes. For example, if you are importing goods today which are of agricultural nature, you pay, the nuts and oil crop development 2% levy. They call it petroleum railway development levy. You call it ADF. On top of that, then you have the taxes, the VATs and so forth, and the duties and so forth. So there's all this. How do you measure the amount of tax revenue? That is important, because many of the government charges and taxes that levies that they collect are not considered as taxes, but they in fact are a very indirect way of collecting taxes. Second, how much is our GDP? So if I, for example, Uhuru in his 10 years, he rebased the GDP by 30%. In other words, he increased the GDP, revised it by 30%. Now, what would that, before he did that, before Uhuru did that, our tax to GDP ratio was 19%. Immediately that, he did the rebasing, it came down to 14%. So even today,
after rebasing,
the president says it's 14%. Let me give you the figures. For example, our tax collection by KRA last year, the year that just ended, was 2.5 trillion. If you check the central bank statistics on what is the GDP for Kenya, the figures that they published for 2022 was 13 trillion. Simple arithmetic. If you divide that 2.5 trillion with 13, you'll get 18%. So we're at 18% if you go by that. So I mean, this thing is all dependent on how you want to measure it. The second thing is that if you look at how the government argues that the reason why we are raising taxes is because our tax to GDP is low compared to other parts of the world. It's not true. Look at America. It's the richest country in the world, the most developed country. Is tax to GDP ratio is 27%. Compare that with Europe. The average is 33%. So are Americans, collecting taxes? Will you say no? No. Look at Africa's largest economy. It's Nigeria. Its tax to GDP ratio is less than 7%. Less than 7%. Are you saying that those Nigerians, the economy is terrible and those people are living in a bad shape because they are not collecting taxes? Look at South Africa. It's 25. It's the highest, obviously. But that 25, does it mean that the economy of Tanzania is so good, of South Africa is so good? No, they have problems with power. They have one of the highest unemployment rates. They have serious problems. So these things, the fact that you collect taxes does not necessarily mean that the more the tax I collect, the more I will save, and the economy will grow, and I will, all Kenyans will be happy and so forth. No, I think this is completely misleading. India is one of the largest democracies in the world. It's 11%. I mean, and it's one of the countries that are exporting most to the rest of the world in agriculture, in many products. So I think this crazy focus by this government on tax is completely misleading. And I think it's disingenuous for the government to continue saying, 1 minute, we are raising taxes because we want to avoid collecting loans. The next it is no, because our ratio is low. The next, every day is a new excuse. Look, you are getting loans. In the government's tax budget policy statement, they said in the 5 years to 2027, we will raise loans amounting to 5 trillion. This is officially in the government budget policy statement. Uhuru collected in 10 years 6 trillion. They want to collect in 5 years 5 trillion. At the same time, you want to collect, taxes from every. Let me tell you, in an economy that is depressed like ours, economy is doing bad. This is not the time to tax. You need to give people incentives. This is when you need to reduce actual taxes so that business can grow. I invest, you create employment, you generate more income. This is the way people do it in the rest of the world. But I think this action by this government seems to be to please Americans, to please IMF. We're playing to another audience, not to the Kenyan people. And I think it needs to stop, really. I mean, you cannot tax people to a point where you're taxing them into poverty. Because the more the taxes means, I don't feel encouraged to do investment. I don't feel encouraged to do business because what will be my bottom line?
Indeed.
I will not be able to earn anything. So you're discouraging people. People are moving out. Businesses will think twice. When you take your pen and pencil, should you invest in this country? Already you have problems of high cost of energy, high problems of infrastructure, and many other challenges. Then you're adding tax. So when you calculate, you find, no, it's better for me to invest in Tanzania. I better go to Ethiopia. Ethiopia is now the largest economy in Eastern Central Africa. Their tax to GDP is only 7%. This thing about thinking that the more tax you collect, you're going to develop a country is nonsense. Let people have money in their pocket, and let the people, generate their own businesses and income. That's how you grow the economy. That's how you employ people. That's how you make people happy. That's my take on it. I think the issue is, yes, the GDP, what Kibaki did, and this president likes saying, I want to do what Kibaki did. Kibaki did not start by taxes. We were in this country, I was the shadow finance minister, so I know what Kibaki did. They focused on growing the economy. The tax grew. You just need to look at how the GDP grew, and you can see then the taxes grew in tandem. But here's a situation where we are introducing taxes as punitive action. Actually, most of the taxes this government is introducing is punitive, period. It has nothing to do with what we are talking about. For example, the motor vehicle that people are talking about. This motor vehicle, when you buy, you paid a lot of taxes. You paid customs duty, you paid excise duty, you paid VAT, you paid huge, in fact, almost more than 100% of the price of the vehicle. Then, throughout your use, you are paying fuel levy. It's 18 shilling per litre. Every single day you are driving that vehicle. You are paying petroleum regulatory levy, which is now 75 cents per litre. The government doesn't look at all those taxes that's generated from your vehicle.
Including the spare parts also that you buy.
Including the spare parts that I am continuously VAT. Now you say, I want to again, otherwise don't use your vehicle, leave it at home. This is just being punitive. I am in an industry, cooking oil, vegetable cooking oil. It's already been taxed, crazy money, including levies for oil crop development and so forth. Today, if you look at Section 42 of the Finance Bill, they're introducing 25% excise duty on a product which is already so expensive. A 20-litre jerrycan is already 4,000 today. You're introducing eco tax on the plastics which are used for the jerrycans and so forth. You're introducing 25% excise levy on the CPO, on the crude that you're importing. Where are you driving? It's not about, there's many of these countries that Ruto wants to compare us with. They do not touch areas of basic necessities. Things like food. You go to Ethiopia and Egypt and many of these countries. On areas of food, they do not actually try to focus, look for taxes. So I think government needs to rethink that it's not about them collecting money and making us happy. No. And they are there to collect money and provide some basic services, which they are not doing. They are not focusing on how the money is being lost. All these other ways in which money is being lost that he talked about. So I think the taxes are just being punitive, and it's rational.